So we're going to start. Tonight, we will be talking about an article that was written by three colleagues and friends, Fred Kushner, Peter Sculco, Will Long, all from the Hospital for Special Surgery. And we're going to be talking about an exciting new product that I think, I personally think, will, we're seeing in its infancy, will absolutely shake up the way we look at outcomes and the way we look at how we evaluate implant designs and patient responses. I'd first like to have our faculty introduce themselves. We'll do it in alphabetical order. Fred?
Yes, my name is Fred Kushner. I'm an orthopedic surgeon at HSS, and I've been involved with this technology since its inception in 2014. So okay. I'm conflicted. That's my disclosure.
All right. Well, I haven't been involved with them, and I'm not conflicted. I think it's a great technology.
I agree.
Will?
Yeah. Hey, my name is William Long. I was in private practice with Fred for many years, and we've joined up again at Special Surgery. I've been involved in a lot of robotics too, working on FDA with Yair Kissen, who's on the call for one system, and second one helped design. I have absolutely no conflicts other than that I think this is a fantastic platform to move forward in orthopedics, and I think the possibilities are almost endless.
And Peter.
Hi, Peter Sculco, also at HSS, hip and knee surgeon. But thanks to my relationship with Fred, I was able to be the first person to put it in along with Fred from my first patient. So that's, I think, my claim to fame with Persona IQ. No conflicts other than love using Persona implant, which it goes along with, and interested in research and knee kinematics. And I thought this really went well together, and excited for what we're going to talk about tonight and what's to come. Thank you.
It's great. I also want to make a comment that tonight's Journal Club is our sponsor advertiser is Canary Medical, the creators, inventors, and the force behind this SmartKnee, this talking knee technology. I want to thank them now. They will give us some more information at about the 30-minute mark. So I'm going to ask you guys a first question to get us going. I'd like someone to explain, just give me his overview of the technology itself. What is it? What does it promise to do? What does it do right now? Whoever wants to grab that question, go ahead.
I'll probably do it since I helped design it. Basically, when we first got the idea, Bill Hunter, who's our CEO, and it was his idea to start this company, his claim to fame was he developed the drug-eluting heart stent, putting medicines on stuff. He did the quill suture. So he's no novice to new technology and revolutionary technology. So the thought was, can we put a sensor in a knee, and one day we'll think $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 for a piece of metal, and it doesn't do anything. We're going to laugh at that. So we came up with various designs. We wanted something easy. You had to try to keep the cost down. That's where we came up with the stem extension. Originally, what we wanted to do was make the stem extension and be it universal, that you could put it on any prosthesis, so adapt current designs. So you could actually compare a Persona to a Journey to an Attune and so forth, and actually level the playing field to see what's best for our patients. That sounds great, but companies aren't going to support this revolutionary technology, invest money, not to have exclusivity. So Zimmer understood the idea, and we developed this stem extension that fits onto the bottom of the Persona. And it's got several different pieces to it. It has accelerometers, it has an IMU board, it has gyroscopes, it has a battery, and it has a peak cone so it can transmit through the bone. And these are all the features. The battery is programmed by when it collects the data that should last about 20 years. And it does collect things like speed, your cadence, your walking speed, how many steps, a lot of gait parameters. Mm-hmm. And in the lab, we've also shown that it can detect loosening. That's not one of our claims. When we have the FDA approval, You have to show that it's a benefit. We're in the process of doing that right now. But right now it's collecting gait parameters. And there's several studies show that by collecting gait parameters, you can judge a patient's recovery. And that's what it basically is. It's a battery. It's sealed, and then it's sealed in another case, and then sealed in the cement, and it transmits to the cement. So it's very safe. And it collects these gait parameters, very frequently the first year, and then less frequently. And that's how we can get 20 years of data.
Okay, any other comments from authors or any other questions before we continue? That seemed pretty comprehensive. Peter?
Yeah, I think the only thing I'd add is that the patient has a base station by their bedside. So you walk around all day long, and then when they sleep in their bed at night, it's automatically downloaded to the base station, which then goes to the cloud over their Wi-Fi. And what's interesting is, say they go on vacation for 2 weeks, it'll actually record 2 weeks of data. So when they come back, it'll dump those 2 weeks, actually up to a month. So that I think really improves the compliance. And there's some data that the Canary has, and the compliance rate is 99, almost 100%.
Right.
Which I think we can talk about tonight is probably one of the biggest strengths, because you're going to have compliant patients and good data collection.
I mean, last time I checked, it's 140 million data points, which is unheard of in this, big data world of ours. And the other thing that we're working on, we have it, it's just the chip shortage has delayed us, is we call it DOS, the doctor's office base station. So now, yes, it collects it at certain times during the day, and you can see the data, but you'll have the ability to turn it on in your office. So imagine a patient coming into your office, and you can put them through a series of tests. So everybody talks about, patient reported outcome measures, but this is actually performance-based. You can actually have a patient do a weight-bearing squat, go up and down stairs. You can even check them for stability by turning the device on and then turning it off. Now, we don't want the patients to do that, because they'll play with it all the time and the battery will die. But this is just more of the things that are on the horizon. We already have the technology to do it.
It's amazing. I gave a lecture at OSET about the concept of the idea of patient-reported outcomes eventually slipping away from us, and we getting patient source outcomes, where we're getting pure information from the source. And I thought that I'll just put up this slide. You can see it, right? The slide, I guess.
Yep.
I have the Canary here. Eventually may connect to the track patch, may connect to some type of robot, could be a Zimmer Striker, connect to pain products. And all these are patient source products, where we're taking out the bias of the question and the bias of the answer. And what do you guys think about this technology of being a patient source outcome versus a patient reported outcome?
I completely agree. I mean, the arbitrary nature, it's like taking a 16-year-old and putting them in a car and asking them what they think of it. They've never been there before. They don't know how to drive. We ask patients patient-reported outcome scores that they're not familiar with. But to get objective data from the patient, I completely agree with you. Not only that, but think about the ability, a number of our colleagues have published papers on the need, whether or not we need physical therapy. Okay, whether or not we need routine follow-ups. We now have the ability, if you think about it, to do remote follow-ups, remote physical therapy, remote evaluations. The benefit to patients is tremendous. When you take a person who has to take a day off work to come back to the office at intervals to just be told that they're doing fine, when you could just check in on them at intervals and bring that back and put it into the patient record as an identified interaction and follow-up, I think that has tremendous benefit.
Yeah. Fred, Peter, comments on the idea of, will we be getting more of these types of products to take away the subjectiveness?
Oh, I think absolutely. I mean, when we first walked around the academy and talked about our idea, we talked to all the major players, and they thought we had 3 heads. Nobody really got the idea. Now everybody's experimenting, and we can debate wearable. I mean, the track patch is good technology, but let's face it, it's short-lived. We did a study with the Fitbit, and yes, it was a study. Patients were motivated to be on the Fitbit, but only 1/3 used it the way they were supposed to. So wearables do have a problem in regards to, you have to use it, you have to put it on correctly. Plus, it's pretty much the short term. You're not going to wear your track patch for 20 years. And that's what we're hoping, is that this data is not only in the near term, but also, like you said, a way to follow up patients. I think all of us during COVID, when we were doing remote, we were monitoring our post-operative patients. And I think all of us were going to be honest, we left feeling a little bit dirty, right? We didn't feel like we were doing a great exam, right? Yeah, let me, Mrs. Jones, let me see your knee. Okay, bend it. Okay, it looks okay. Let me see your wound. It wasn't rewarding in regards to a follow-up visit. It was the best we had, but certainly telemedicine, telehealth follow-up visits were lacking the objective data.
Yep.
Yeah. And I just say, Ira, I think I like that phrase you just coined. It's the first time I've heard it, and I think we're probably going to hear it again. Patient sourced, and just, or just like, patient, the generating data without them even really having to do anything, just through all these biometric devices that we have. Step count is related. You can show, step count relates to satisfaction at 6 weeks, and you look at your step count trajectory. There's some data there that shows you can predict satisfaction at 6 weeks. You add in accelerometer, gyroscope, a gait quality metric, all the sophisticated, kinematic data from IQ. It's probably gonna be more granular prediction than just a simple step count. And next thing you know, you're really going to be able to probably make predictions without the patient doing anything.
We're actually already seeing that.
Yeah.
When we first got the data, and Peter and I talked about it, we looked at it and said, I think the patient's doing okay, but it was a new concept for us, right? We're seeing 6 graphs of all the gait parameters, but now our data scientists have actually come up with these recovery curves. I'll give you a perfect example. One of my patients was calling up for pain medicines. I didn't think he was doing well. So the recovery curves haven't been released yet, but since I'm part of the company, I called up David Lee and I said, David, I want to see the recovery curves for my patients. Just want to see how it plots differently. So he goes, he calls me back in 15 minutes. I know why you're calling. The first person's doing great. The second one's doing pretty good, but that third one is doing horrible. Okay. It really does have a predictive value. And it's important to catch them early. Will alluded to a study at a Rothman where they didn't send them to physical therapy, right? It was a home. And what they found was, yes, many patients can do a self-directed therapy program and they could save you money. But the ones that weren't doing well, that you didn't pick up, wound up eating up any savings you had on the other patients. Right. So I think that they go hand in hand. Being able to monitor your patients as you do an independent physical therapy, I think is very important.
Yeah, I would agree. And the other thing I think that it will give us is objective feedback with respect to other aspects to technology. So for instance, the very expensive robots and other tools we're using. I mean, where is the value? I think this may be one of the parameters that's used to determine whether or not a new product is of value. Are you improving the outcome of patients in an objective fashion? So we've not had that in past. And I think that's a very sort of tantalizing next step.
Well, I think don't you think it's be more than that, Will? I think, right now, you and I just came back from the Knee Society. And if we said, what's the correct way to put in a knee? We get 17 different opinions: kinematic alignment, anatomic alignment, put it a little loose, put it a little tight. I think what we're going to have is we're going to have the preoperative data. We're going to get preoperative data. Intraoperative, pick your poison, whether it's a ROSA, it's a Corey, whatever robot you're using, Ortholine, and you're going to have that intraoperative data. Then you have your postoperative data. And I think very quickly you're going to see, and maybe it'll be different. Maybe a skinny guy like Will, his goal or his target is different than a muscular, Adonis like me. And I think we may find different goals for different people, a tall person versus a short person. But I don't think we know everything we need to know. Even the diagnosis of instability we can't agree upon. So I think this is going to help us answer a lot of these unanswered questions. Yeah,
and Peter and I sit and, Tim Wright presented some data on the tester that we're using, the dynamic tester of knees, and looking at stability. And again, I think the more of this data we can collate and put together, I think the better we can evaluate what we're doing. Because currently, I agree with you, the problems I find of very limited value, and the other outcome scores are very difficult to weed through. So we have a real need in our field for objective data, objective outcome data.
Yep.
So I have a question about the data. So this product produces a huge amount of data. Who analyzes the data, and how is it presented to the surgeon in a way that the surgeon can absorb 140 million points of data?
Well, right now, the surgeon gets the graphs, and Dr. Yergler has done the most out of anybody. As you see enough of these gait, you kind of learn what's a good-looking patient and what patient's a little bit slow by looking at the different curves.
Okay.
This was just our first attempt. That's the raw data. As I said, the recovery curves will actually show you where your patient stands with everybody else. If you're in the top 25 percentile, you know you're doing well. If you're in the bottom 10, you know you're not doing well. And then that later, I mean, this is all the value of big data, is then you'll have it hopefully break it down into maybe one index score where you can actually have a red light, green light, where you log on, you look at the data, we'll have a visual cue or a warning. And we already have that technology that's in place. So once again, we can't make any claims about the data because the FDA didn't give us approval for it. We're in the process of doing studies now to get that. But that's the goal. You take the raw data, now you're translating into recovery curves, to translating that into a gait score, a limping score with a visual analog, who's at risk, who's at not. So it'll just get more refined with time.
That's great. And, yeah,
Just
Peter.
that the data is now presented in My Mobility, which is, Biomed came up with this remote monitoring platform, education, exercises, and it's on your iPhone, Android. You can also couple with your iWatch. So I just have that in my practice as a background because it's great because it's, it's like time to the patient's surgical date. It starts 1 month prior and it gives them, exercises and education leading up to surgery and follows them 3 months afterwards. So this is layered on top of that. So when you open up My Mobility, every patient has their own dashboard. You can pull up their IQ data within that. I think what Fred said is great, though, in a way that, if you have, let's say 40 or 50 patients, on a dashboard, you don't have time to look through all that. Mm-hmm. But ways that you can flag patients down the road with parameters that are of concern, and it'll pull maybe 4 of them out saying, hey, these 4 are in the lower 25 percentile in their IQ data. They already have something like that. Actually, it's called Walk AI. They released it at Last Academy, which is saying from basically the step count from their iPhone, from the My Mobility data, if it's within 60% certainty based on their AI machine learning algorithm, it'll highlight that patient in some way. So that's, I think, an initial venture into prediction and sort of filtering patients based on all this data that we're collecting, because we're busy and we're all busy, right? We don't have time to go through all this data, like you said. So I think the goal for everyone and who's in the design and in the development is to make this data actually easier for the surgeons, and more streamlined.
But we also want the surgeons to spend the time in this. We will find better ways to present the data, but we also want the surgeons to look at it, digest it, and figure out better ways to use it. And you will be compensated for your time. It does look like this will qualify for remote patient monitoring, where you'll be compensated, either you or perhaps your physician extender, to look at these patients and report back. So, it's not like we're giving you more scut work to do that you're not going to be compensated for. It looks like we will be able to bill for it.
One of the European companies I worked with demonstrated that when they saw a crescendo in the step count, very early in the first 2 weeks, they would see a subsequent crescendo in the patient's pain scores. And so they found it very effective when they saw a significant jump in the step count early on, to contact the patient and say, hey, back off a little bit. There's a lot of discussion. We all want our patients to do really well, but there's no question there's a convalescence phase. So things like that, where you can set parameters that contact the office. It doesn't necessarily have to be one of us directly, but where you can interact it rather than just at stepwise, 3 weeks, 6 weeks, 3 months, whatever you choose, actually be more intelligent about your interactions and make the interactions effective for the patient when they need that.
It's such an interesting comment. Well, I just think one comment is like, I feel like knee replacement is like it's like a funnel. You take all these patients with all these different motivations, comorbidities, knee pathologies, you drive them through one surgery for the right, and you put a knee in, and then the funnel goes out again, and you're trying to contain them within this sort of margin of safety. And some need to be motivated, and some need to be held back, and some are just right. And so, to your point, I think is very well taken. If we could use it as a way to bring people back to the norm within the first few weeks of recovery, because we have patients who do too much. I just had a lady who was doing like deep squats 4 weeks out and has like a non-displaced vertical patella fracture. She wanted to go back to tennis and was working out 12 times like a week, like double the PT sessions, and I couldn't stop her. But if you could do something with IQ with objective data, remove me from being kind of judging her in some way, but really make it objective, it actually helps. That's actually all the data we have now has actually helped us as clinicians sort of be a little bit more objective and not like judging their recovery, but saying, hey, here's the data, here's our predictions, this is what we think is the truth, and I think IQ can maybe help with that.
Isn't that where Ira's concept of tying this in with a track patch would be beneficial, where you could actually then see surgical data and see how quick you took it up.
Yes, that goes back to what I said, where I think it's going to be a triad. Preoperative data, and there's many ways to collect that. Intraoperative with the robots or an ortholine device, and then postoperatively with your built-in sensors, or even a track patch or several of the others that are out there.
So I got a question from the audience, which it went to everyone, but I'll mention it from Masha Dumanis. Undoubtedly, there is predictive. Masha, you want to mention the question yourself, or you want me to read it?
No, sure. I can ask. So obviously there is all this value, and I think it's tremendous. And hi everyone. I've been kind of following smart implants for nearly a decade. I'm not a clinician, for full disclosure, but I'm in the consulting world on the commercial side. So I think there is this tremendous value, and we're talking about potentially reducing the burden on the patient for coming into the office, or even the burden on you as clinicians for following the patient. Potentially understanding where are we goal seeking to, how do we think about implant design? But there's a cost associated with, designing and manufacturing these smart implants. And so whom do you think that cost should ultimately rest with? Because there's obviously going to be a discussion about this, in our price constrained world, in the world of a DRG. Where do you guys think that, who do you think should shoulder the cost of a smart implant?
Well, who shoulders the cost for an implant right now? The hospital. So the hospital negotiate their rates. And basically this is a stem. What is a dumb stem cost? I mean, there already is cost. I can argue that stems are beneficial for certain patients, osteoporotic, obese patients. So there's already a cost for a stem. And I think if there is an additional cost, because it's always how the hospital negotiates, the hospital will pay for it. But let's face it, when we did the bundled payments, what was the bundle killer? Okay, it wasn't an extra $500 for the prosthesis. It was the rehab cost, going to an acute rehab, going to a subacute, going to therapy for 7 months. Those are the things that kill your bundle payment, and these would help drive those costs down. I think they will. So,
Fred, will the fact that the hospitals absorb that cost and paid the upcharge for this deal, will they feel that they're entitled to the data, and will they make a push to get access to the data?
That's kind of a thing. When we first started off, there was a 40-page contract. Now it's down to 7.5. This is uncharted territory. I mean, like I said, our CEO, Bill Hunter, he did the drug-eluting heart stent, and it caught people by surprise. But very quickly, it was the #1 best-selling medical device ever out there, and turned the #4 company into the #1 company. And there was additional costs with that, okay? But there was additional benefits. So I think as we see the more and more benefits, as we get these recovery curves, we keep being able to do more and more diagnosis features with this, I think the small upcharge will be justified.
Yeah, I think you have to look at it as, look, I was down at NYU for a number of years. Orthopedics is 42% of their profit. This is an incredibly profitable field. I don't think there's any question that there's money sloshing around this field. But to your point, I mean, we still consider it in terms of its incremental cost improvement, right? So what we're really looking at is value. So is it providing value? So I agree with you. Every new technology should be truly evaluated based on value. I would argue, in many respects, a number of the technologies that we've taken on and that have a dramatic upswing in orthopedics over the last 10 years have been based on marketing and not value. So I think this actually does provide some objective. And again, I'm not conflicted on this. I think this actually does provide some very important objective ability to go back and evaluate other technology. I think actually you may find that institutions start saying, wait, we need our 17th robot. Where's the value in these things? We got Fred doing manual knees and his scores are X, and you're doing it takes you half an hour longer and you're doing a knee that's much more expensive. Where's the value? Show me the value proposition. So I think this technology has value inherent in it.
Any other comments on that? I think it's a great question.
I have a comment. I would add that I think my understanding is that remote monitoring codes have been widely used in other specialties. They're relatively new to orthopedics, but they're coming. And CMS sees the value in remote monitoring and has really doubled down on these remote monitoring codes by releasing an entirely new set of remote monitoring codes in 2021 that are specifically for remote therapeutic monitoring.
Yep. Any comments on that before I weigh in on it? Yeah, RTMs are going to really help compensate for surgeons and surgeon times. If you're employed, it'll go to the hospital. But this is bringing in a whole era of what I talked one time on a LinkedIn post, that the cost of outpatient joints, for example, actually is higher for the surgeon. In the days when you used to do an operation, you kept them in the hospital 5 days, you sent them to a skilled nursing facility. The surgeon didn't spend any of their time-driven activity-based costing or anything. And now, when you put them out as an outpatient, your staff's getting more calls, you hire a nurse navigator, maybe two, So cost is a funny beast. But I really agree with the panel on the idea that there have been quite a number of incremental costs that have not had objective data on their value. And I think that was Will's point. And I think it's a great point. I think it's Fred's point. I'm sure it's Peter's point as well. But
Laura raises a good point. I mean, there's two kinds of monitoring. You have RPM, remote patient monitoring. And for that, you have to use a medical FDA cleared device. You have to collect physiological data. You need 16 days of data collection in a calendar month, and it has to be under the physician's supervision. The other one is remote therapeutic monitoring. You still need an FDA-approved device. You still need 16 days, and they're daily recordings and programmed alerts for the musculoskeletal status, therapy adherence, etc. And I pulled up some slides. I'm not reciting this off the top of my head. So for the remote patient monitoring, you get a code for the service initiation. That's $20. Automatically transmitted collection data. That's another $55. And then the first 20 minutes of RPM care is another $50. All right. And then therapeutic is very similar in regards to the charges: the service initiation, data transmission, and then the management fee. And that's what's out there right now. But of course, that may change. I mean, the biggest fear is always, once a lot of people start using these codes, will CMS, despite them being of value, cut them to save money?
Great.
I would say that we're very, I've been very closely following CMS's activity. And if anything, it looks like they've doubled down on these remote monitoring codes. And also the proposed changes for 2021, if anything, are to expand these codes.
All right. So I'm going to make a left turn here. I think we have our sponsors, Canary Medical, who's going to give us 3 to 5 minutes of time for their efforts. Caitlin, are you going to do it, or is somebody else from Canary?
I think Beth is logged on. She's going to do it.
I think Esther's doing it. Is she logged on? I can't see everything. Esther, are you on?
Oh, Esther.
Esther is.
There she is.
Hi. Let me share my screen. And I really hope I can keep this within 3 to 5 minutes.
It's fine. It's fine.
Okay. So just to introduce myself, I'm Esther. I'm a director of engineering on the data informatics team here at Canary. So I wanted to take this opportunity to show your vision for Persona IQ, go a little deeper into the data. And we'd also like to introduce to you some of the additional analytical features I think Dr. Kushner has mentioned up so far. And also during this presentation, please feel free to interrupt me if you have any comments or questions. So so I wanted to start with one of the major value propositions of Persona IQ. So some people have compared Persona IQ to wearables and have raised the question of why not collect sensor data from something like a Fitbit or an Apple Watch. And the answer is that with Persona IQ, the sensor is implanted, which means vastly better patient compliance. So, obviously wearables can be forgotten, worn incorrectly, or batteries might be dead. So with wearables, you'd probably be missing a lot of data. And even the quality of that data would be questionable. So if you contrast that with Persona IQ, you can see on the left, we have compliance close to 100%. And that's because patients only need to keep their home base stations plugged in, connected to Wi-Fi, and they just need to sleep in their bed every so often. So this high compliance rate translates to a very complete and representative data set of TKA patients during their recovery period. So this is our vision for Persona IQ. And that patient compliance that I just talked about is an important component of the first part of our vision, which is to capture high quality data from every patient every day. So we can do that for the first year and for many years after that as well. We use that data to improve monitoring for both the clinician and the patient, using that objective data about the knee throughout their recovery and beyond. And in that process, we can amass a very large data set, and we can use that very large data set to create new diagnostic and predictive tools to help surgeons and their patients to mitigate some of the major complications of TKA. So next, I'm going to show you a video. So this is a video that demonstrates how the data is generated, an example of how that data can be analyzed. This is one of our Canary team members, Paul, wearing a wearable version of our sensor, walking on a treadmill. And the signal that you're seeing here is the angular velocity in the sagittal plane generated by one of the gyroscopes in the implant. So Paul's walking normally on the left and walking with a limp on the right due to a brace that he's wearing. And you can see that the signal belonging to limping on the right is more compressed than the signal on the left. So even with the human eye, you can see that these signals that are captured by the sensor are quite different between a healthy gait and a limping gait. So you can see that you can also, I think it was in the beginning part of the video, but there are fiducial points that go along with the signal as well that all have physiological meaning as well. And these can all feed into a machine learning model that we can use to diagnose different kinds of conditions. So that leads us to our next slide, which is, I wanted to introduce a new feature that we're also working on that, called the Gait Quality Index. So using the data that you can illustrate by Paul walking on a treadmill, we were able to collect a lot of data like that and build a prototype model using machine learning techniques to detect limping. So we can use that prototype as kind of like a proof of concept for this Gait Quality Index feature. So this feature is going to be a new gait parameter that allows clinicians to know remotely whether their patients are walking or not in their daily lives. So you can imagine this can help detect issues with abnormal gait or with pain. For this score, a high score means that the gait looks very healthy. A low score means that they're severely limping. We're planning to validate this feature, a clinical study, and submit it and release to production next year. So next, I want to show some of the data and what it actually looks like for a real patient. So here you can see 6 different parameters. I actually included 5 parameters that are already in production, also the Gait Quality Index on the top right. So for each of these 6 parameters, there are plots for over time. So these are the weekly metrics for this one patient. And this patient, I'm going to tell you, actually did have an MUA, and I'll go more into that later, but the red line represents when that MUA actually occurred. But the main takeaway I want you guys to have is that you can see like a general upward trend in these parameters over time, but overall it's a little hard to know what to think about it. There's like an upward trend, but you don't know, is that normal, good, or bad? So now I want to take this opportunity to show this exact same data, but on the recovery curve feature that I think Dr. Kushner brought up earlier, and how that recovery curve will make it much easier to interpret and action on this data. So here are the 6 recovery curves, one for each metrics. The purple region in the back is actually the recovery curve. So these curves represent the percentiles across the entire population of persona IQ patients. So the middle dotted line for each of these curves, it represents the 50th percentile. So you can think of that as the average patient. So if, for example, you look at the functional knee range of motion chart, which is in the bottom middle, you can see that at week 10, the average patient has a functional knee range of motion approximately 54 degrees. But this patient actually, whose data is represented by this black line, falls in about the lowest 10th percentile according to the recovery curve. So you can take the takeaway here for a clinician looking at this data, they would know that this patient is below average when it comes to functional knee range of motion. And so back to the fact this patient had an MUA at week 10, you can see that the functional knee range of motion, the gait quality index, active step count, several of the gait parameters are extremely low, even before the MUA occurs. So you can imagine that a clinician reviewing this data could have been able to tell pretty early on that this patient was at risk of arthrofibrosis and potentially could have intervened early by maybe prescribing more physical therapy and maybe could have even avoided the MUA entirely. So next, this is a roadmap of some of the analytical features that we have in our plans. I already just talked about recovery curves and gait quality index, but you can see that in addition, we also have other analytical features in our future, such as diagnostics tools for things like stiffness, instability, and infection. So in conclusion, I hope I've conveyed to you what we're calling the data flywheel effect of our product, which is that we're continually collecting data of multiple types into a rapidly growing pool. That volume and quality of data allows us to come up with better insights into the patient, and in turn will result in better care and better patient outcomes. And, when patient outcomes improve, the platform is more widely adopted and the cycle repeats.
Thank you.
That is all I had.
Thank you, Esther.
Of course.
All right, let's bring this back. There you go. Good deal. Great. That's a great explanation. How do we buy the company? Just kidding.
It's private, unfortunately.
It's private. Okay, private. Okay, just want to know. So there was a question. Andrew McNaughton, you want to ask your question? Well, I'll ask it for you. Will Canary be able to provide real data for remote assessments during a telehealth follow-up?
Well, I'm not sure what he means by real data. You'll have
like while you're watching the patient walk, getting the data, I guess. Real time.
I mean, that's certainly in the works. The doctor's office base station is not currently available, but the hope is that you can turn that on and then be able to see the data. Absolutely.
Really? It's interesting. So
we haven't done it yet. It's not released yet. Okay, we have the base stations, but the international chip shortage, we concentrate on building the device in the base stations, not the doctor's office base station.
Right. I am going to share a screen again, I think. Yes. All right. So this was a talk I gave on the patient source outcomes. You know, the idea that we're really not interested in opioid sparing, we're interested in pain sparing, and patient reported outcomes versus patient source outcomes, which I think this is a patient source outcome. But the question really is, at some point in time, with this type of implant, it was obviously giving us functional status. It may decrease costs in finding out patients at risk in a longitudinal way, like some people that comment on that. Will healthcare policy change? Will pain management be part of this equation? Will we learn about implant-related effects, and will we change implant evolutionary design? I mean, that's kind of a holy grail, which I call the kind of holy grail of things. What do you guys think about that idea, about this technology in the longitudinal pathway, you know, essentially decreasing costs, you know, in a sense, you know, getting better outcomes, learning more about implant design? I don't know. Peter, what do you think about that?
I think it's possible. I mean, I think, you know, a year in, it's amazing to see how much data they've collected. And now you have, you know, what we wanted when we did in that first patient. You know, you had one patient, you didn't really understand what the values meant. And now you have all these now recovery curves, you have some normative values. You start to see when your patients are on or off the curve. Now, granted, pre-op functionality, as was mentioned, I think does matter, where the predictions are where they should be on the curve, because not everyone comes in knee replacement. Some came out on a walker, some came on a cane, some are playing golf the week before. So that probably predicts your outcome. But I'm excited to see now we have these recovery curves. And once those are released, and I hope the FDA does, you know, approves it, and all of a sudden you see patients off the curve and I can intervene. And then can we do studies that show that your manipulation rate goes down, your readmission rate, you know, goes down, that your, you know, that you have some value that we can prove. I think we're on the cusp of being able to look into that and try to prove that, right? Because now you have data that is empowering to see people who are not on the curve. And now the question is, can the interventions start to change patient outcomes? And I think that's probably going to be what the next 1 to 3 years is going to be, you know, dedicated towards. But for year one, it's very encouraging, right? From the data and the presentation that we just heard, it's all ready for prime time for these sort of targeted interventions. And then it really gets exciting. I'd say one more comment that, you know, Will and I have we had a meeting this morning. We wake up, you know, nice and early, 6:30 meetings, you know, a couple times a month for knee kinematics. And a lot of the data that's coming out of our biomechanics lab is based on someone from the OrthoLoad, which was an electronic instrumented knee in Germany that's over 10 years ago. And it produced data with the patients going up and down stairs and walking on a gait map. And that data from just a few patients is used by engineers all over the world for over a decade, and is the basis for the computational modeling that we use in biomechanics.
Wow. With
IQ, I mean, think about it. You're talking about 10 patients, which is like 10,000. So, you know, the possibilities, just seeing what we've done with these few instrumented knees from several years ago, and what that's provided us from a research standpoint in terms of knee kinematics, it's pretty astounding for what I think we can do when you have 10,000. So I look at the Persona IQ like a little gait lab in a STEM. You know, that's what I hope when we look at under the hood from a research perspective, that's what we're going to get. And I think we just touched the surface in terms of some of the kinematic data, in terms of knee stability, you know, alignment studies we can do, kinematic versus mechanical, and then look at how the knee is performing under real-time loads. So long-winded description of what we can do. That relates though back to your comment. I mean, the holy grail, right? Improving value, decreasing patient complications with MUA, readmission, knee alignment, which leads to how we put our implants in. So it kind of does all connect the dots of what you just outlined. And I think it's all doable based on what I see.
Amazing. Yeah, Kirsten, do you have a question? You raise your hand.
Hi, thank you. So Fred, guys who've used this, what am I doing wrong? I started using this a few months ago. I thought I could sell ice to an Eskimo, and the patient walks out, signed up for the IQ, and then here and there, more patients than I thought call back the office a couple of days later, say no thanks.
Why do they say they're not interested?
No reason. I don't know. I make it very clear it's not a tracker. I make it very clear that it's got benefit for them and the greater scientific community, but also for them personally. All these things that you said, and I have no idea why. I could sell it to them face to face. They walk out and
That's a problem. Every family member has an opinion. You know, it's hard. I mean, when we first started putting them in, people would ask me if you could track them, and my comment was, "We don't need to track you. We got the vaccine for that." So, but you know, look, you got to sit their fears. Like I had a patient today, I signed up, and he's 53, needs a knee replacement. He's very active. And basically with the conversation, I said, look, why do you want to do this? Number one, you're 53, this is going to be on for a long time. Number two is you're very active. We can monitor you more close. You don't have to come in for your follow-ups because you're flying in from Chicago. And number three is information is key. What we're learning now, you may have a problem. Your knee might be painful 5 years ago, and this might help us decide why you're in pain. And it was for those reasons, but we just had an educated conversation about what the benefits were, and it was like no pressure. If you want it, that's great. If not, you don't need it. We'll put you a traditional on it. I mean, there is a benefit for a stem. Fortunately or unfortunately, my grand rounds tomorrow is on the obese patient because that's my side specialty. And there's nothing wrong with putting a stem in an obese patient. So that actually sells it for them as well, because you're explaining, if I'm going to put a stem in, I might as well do something more than just sit there. So there's many ways to do it. But I think as we get more and more information, and certainly take some of the patients you've done, and you can certainly speak with the data informatics of Canary. And I know they're meeting with doctors and going over some of the stuff to explain it in more depth. But if you get a copy of your recovery curves, you can actually show it to your patients to actually see what you're getting. I think that would be beneficial.
I have another question from Mike Langworthy. Mike, you out there?
Yeah. So, not playing devil advocate or anything. I'm a chairman at a program. It's an economic sell. We're actually looking at the technology. So as far as predictive analytics go, if I've got somebody that's depressed, they have more than 5 allergies, they're on multiple medications, they're the ones that are going to be problematic. My individual coming in that's a golfer, executive with high life satisfaction, they're not an issue. It's not a matter of kinematics in those folks, because I put them in the same way every time. The issue seems to be supratentorial as far as the folks that are going to get stiffness. There are actually language barriers. We had issues with our Hispanic speaking population. I did a manual for them in Spanish. They were still having issues with stiffness, and it turned out that they were illiterate. They couldn't actually understand our literature. And then we found we had more stiffness with press fit technology than with cemented technology. And it kind of makes sense that when you press fit, the osteocytes are generating proteins that also get off, escape off, and activate the fibroblast. So as having to sell this to my health system, it's going to be a little bit of a tough sell. And once again, I see more of a supratentorial issue with the patients that have issues than I do with knee kinematics. And I'm just curious if you had any comment.
Do all the speaking. Will or Peter, you want to jump in on that one?
I think it's I agree with everything you said. You know, we're pretty good at predicting, the red flags for patients, we think is going to struggle, but we're not perfect at it. And, there was a study that said that, trying to predict patients, how they're going to do after knee replacement. I think Alex McLawhorn, who did a lot of work at our place on PROMs and to give us thresholds for like who's junior, for when patients are good candidates for knee replacement. And I've used these kind of baseline values, and actually said that there was a study that said, okay, how do you think that patient is going to do after surgery? And surgeons actually did not predict it as well as we thought we would. And so I think in the AI space, what we're learning is that demographic predictors get you so far, like tabular data. When you layer on image-based AI, you get another layer of predictive accuracy. And then if you can, I think, lay on then, something kinematic and intra-articular, like, which is what this, intra-articular data, I think when you layer on multiple layers of data, demographic, image-based, and now kinematic, the power of these multi-layered models is is going to improve to some degree. Now, maybe it's going to go from, I don't know what the percentage increase is going to be, but I think it's going to go up a few percent and maybe get us closer to being able to really say with some sort of 95% above certainty how a patient is really going to be doing. So that's one comment I'd say is that layered data in the AI space seems to improve overall accuracy of predictions.
I think it also goes by, knowledge is key, right? I mean, when Mako first came out with a robot, what was the evidence that $1 million purchase was going to improve patient outcomes or save you money? Okay, it seemed like a good idea, but I think here there is some basic science that shows that looking at the gait parameters can help you predict and make earlier diagnosis who's to do well and who not. And look at some of the studies we already mentioned, when to intervene and when not in regards to physical therapy. So it may save you money, but this is all uncharted territory. We gather the data, we analyze it, we see how it can, help decide why that 20% is unhappy. And it's more than just abnormal psychological scales. 20% of knees, several studies have shown patients just aren't as happy. Hips are wow and knees are out. So this may help untangle that. But once again, it's not just immediate post-operative, it's also following the patient for the next 20 years.
Yeah. Mike, I would say I've been to meetings with you before, and you're a very objective guy. I mean, we can point out waste in the healthcare system pretty quickly. Viscosupplementation has been a concern with a multi-billion-dollar industry with questionable value. But I would say that even if it just provided me good data on how people were doing, I'm nearing the second decade in my career. And one of the things that I find most difficult is, although I enjoy doing so, is seeing these routine follow-ups on patients who are doing really well. It mucks up my whole day in terms of getting to see new patients. So if we look at sort of the curve of patient aging and the baby boomers who are going to peak by 2029 in our area, and they're in the prime of their joint replacement years, we've got to find a way to get a limited number of physicians to see these people. And if I'm not doing, routine knee visit all the time, I think there's a lot more ability for me to use my clinical time effectively. I would point out one other thing, and I know, and I'm just going to comment on this because, again, you've been on the podium a lot, and I've heard some great talks you've given, is that every time I'm on the podium with people whom I've known for many, many years, every few years I turn around and they're doing something totally different. We have no objective measure. So someone tells me, oh, now I leave my knee a little looser in flexion, or I leave it a little looser on the lateral side. I don't know what it's looser than, or it's a little more varus. And everyone uses the term gentleman's varus. And yet all the good data studies show that that's not a good thing to do for long-term outcomes. So I think getting objective evaluations of some of these sort of myriad of changes we're doing all the time would be very helpful.
That's a great point, Will. I think I have a couple of questions. We're sort of towards the end. We could extend a little bit, but I want to ask a couple of tough questions. Who's afraid of this technology? Who is afraid? Payers, maybe some surgeons, some device makers that don't have it, the government. I mean, who potentially is afraid of the success of this technology? Anyone want to take that on?
I will point out that, to Yair's point, that patients are a little fearful of having a technology that can be evaluated, outside their personal realm. So I do think that's something where we do need to be careful in how we explain it to them and who has the data and who is able to see patient-specific data. So I do think that's an issue. I think some companies that we're all aware of have had some mixed success with new models. Mm-hmm. In fact, some would argue that the older models are very frequently the better model. So as we're introducing new technology, I think this could be a very raw evaluator of whether or not there is value in those. If your tibia comes loose within 2 years and you can see it loosening with some of the gyroscopic and gait parameter data that they're going to provide us with, I think that should be something that they're a little more fearful of,
once again, full disclosure, don't have FDA approval for it. But one of the things that we did is we put one in loose and we put one in solid. This was done at Warsaw, and you could actually pick up the changes in signal. We just took the lead 90 degrees and dropped. You can pick up change in signal. So how does that change practice? Now, some hospitals might say, well, what's that benefit me? The 90 days are over. What do I care what happens in 5 years? But if you can actually pick up a tibia loose before you get osteolysis, before you have bone loss, you now have a much simpler revision. Who knows? We may see enough gait patterns to be up patients. Hey, by the way, Mr. Jones, we think you developed Parkinson's because your gait changed. Maybe we use it as a troubleshooting device, okay? Maybe we go ahead and say, you know what, you're not happy. Let's put you in the office and run you a bunch of tests and see if a special analysis can help find out why you're unhappy. Maybe infection, maybe there's just, and these are all maybes, but you have to do a lot of these, and maybe there's a certain gait pattern that comes pathognomonic for infection. You're doing well, your motion goes down, you take a shorter stance. Maybe we'll be able to make the diagnosis of infection. I don't know if it's going to happen, but if you look at how this AI works, you know, we're collecting data points all over the place, and this is how you make conclusions by analyzing this big data. So,
another quick question, and then I'm going to ask for some final comments from each of the faculty. If this becomes an amazing gold standard of how we need to look at how prostheses are performing and how surgeons are performing, what happens to its availability outside of the persona IQ? And that's a business decision, a business idea. But when something becomes a gold standard like Dolby or something, you know, what happens, you know?
Right now, Zimmer has exclusivity, so they will have to make a decision.
Yeah.
They can actually rent out the technology and let other people put it in, or people try to go around our patents. Good luck, because Bill Hunter's on the phone. He spent a year before he even talked to me, you know, protecting the IP. And there's a lot of IP, hundreds of IP. So I don't think people go around it. You know, people try to design something a little bit different, perhaps, you know, but look, first we got to get the data to show it's a real benefit. Then we can analyze how to extend it to the masses. But nobody's going to invest the amount of money. You know, Ivan from Zimmer, Thorns, the chief operating officer, COO. I mean, he had insight. I mean, he took a gamble on this and locked it up. All right, and he's helped develop it and bring it to the forefront. And they're not going to let everybody else use it until they've actually sit there and gotten the benefit of their investment. I mean, that's just common sense.
Yep. So let's get some final comments from the faculty. I'll start in reverse alphabetical order. I'll start with Dr. Peter Sculco.
Sure. You know, I think it's just a responsibility of all of us, a lot of us on this call, to make the most of this technology, this interaction between data scientists, industry, surgeons, consultants. People are all in this space, and I think you know, I see it as a responsibility to make the most of this technology. And Fred just mentioned a lot of amazing maybes. And I would love to see all those come to fruition for our patients in the next 5, maybe it's going to take 10 years. But I mean, imagine if even half of what Fred just said came true. That would be game changing in what we do and how we practice. So that's what I'm saying. I'm committed. I think a lot of people on this call are committed, but it's our responsibility to make sure it has value for our patients and for society. And that's going to come from putting it in more patients, right? Get data, and then also being really rigorous with our clinical insights and data analysis and the interaction between all the players, you know? So anyway, so I'm excited, motivated, and hopefully we can get together in the Journal Club in a couple of years and see what's been accomplished and what we've done for our patients.
All right, Will?
Yeah, just to add to what Peter says, you know, every time you sit in a grand rounds or something and they present you with data, it's extremely powerful for surgeons. We're for the most part, I would say, good people. We want to do better. We want to have happy patients, but sometimes we feel like we don't have appropriate amount or enough information or insight to make a scientific or an evidence-based change. And you know, to be honest with you, Fred, I don't know, to your point, as to how much IP you have, but we need sensors, we need data. You know, I I don't drive on a flat tire for 2 miles now. We have sensors that tell us this stuff. Like the world has moved on from that. And I think we need to too. This is metal and plastic. We're in the coming into the mid, 21st century, or we've got to be better than this. So I think that this is a gateway. Fred, this is a gateway drug. We're going to move up the ladder from this, and I really look forward to seeing what we're doing 10 years from now.
Yeah, Fred, why don't you bring us home?
Well, I think we've said enough about this technology. I think it's interesting, and we'll see what the future holds. Ira, I just want to thank you for your journal. I've appreciated and enjoyed reading the articles and these journal clubs. Our residents and fellows enjoy it. I know I enjoy it. It's nice, fun to see something on social media without Michael Ass picture on it. So thank you for inviting the old guys today, and keep up the good work. This is great for education, and we appreciate all the hard work you do.
I appreciate you guys too. Thank you.
And Ira, that said, I think it's important for everyone to know that this journal club is recorded. It will be released on YouTube very soon, so everyone can access it on an ongoing basis. It's also recorded as a podcast where it will be on the joey.pub website and on Spotify.
Yeah, so it endures and endures, just like this article, which got 2,300 views already. So with that, I genuinely want to thank our faculty, Fred Kushner, Peter Sculco, and Will Long, and everyone who joined us tonight. Absolute pleasure. Okay, thank you.
Good night. Thank you.
Thanks, awesome job.
Thanks, Ira.
Thank you.
Bye.